Hi, I'm Sami, and this is the Career Kickstart Show. And I have friend of the show and fiduciary, Lucas, on the show. Now, I had Lucas on the show a while back just talking about how people can save money and just be financially wise. And I thought, you know what? We have a very unique situation going on right now with this current dystopian pandemic thing that is the theme of 2020. So I thought, who better to bring on the show than our friendly neighborhood fiduciary? I know, Lucas, I never really get to exactly what you do, but how about you give the listeners a better explanation on what a fiduciary is, because I just like saying the word and I haven't explained it yet.
Sure. Yeah. So fiduciary, it's basically, I think you described it well in the last episode that I was on, where basically I'm required by law to do what's best for my clients. So can't do shady things. I have to do what's in the best interest of my clients. And the interesting thing is most financial advisors, most financial planners are not required to be fiduciaries, but I've signed an oath and there's a couple of organizations I'm a part of that just really require it. Otherwise I'd get kicked out. And then also if I ever didn't act in someone's best interest, there's actually grounds for people to stand on to sue me and things like that. Yeah, intentionally, when I started my company, I decided being a fiduciary is a no-brainer. There's no reason not to be it, but that's a baseline. I'm not supposed to do anything shady or wrong. Everything needs to be in the best interest and in the up and up for my clients.
So essentially, you're in the financial justice league, which
Yeah,
which I definitely love, because this is a scary time for people in a lot of ways. And I think one of the topics that has come up, besides healthcare and the coronavirus itself, is the economy, is the effect on people. We are seeing record number of people getting onto unemployment, and it's been very unsettling. The markets are spooked. So what have you been hearing from your clients? I assume that you are getting calls. What are people asking you? What is the general temperature check that you've been seeing on the financial side of things?
Yeah. So when people get spooked, whether it's pandemic or anything else, people experience a wide range of emotions. So I've had even sometimes the same clients think that, oh, this is a great time to buy it. And then they reach out, they're like, oh, how can we pour more money into the stock market? Then a week or two later, they're like, oh, should we be getting out? Should we be cashing out our 401ks and things like that? So this type of scenario, it draws people all over the place in terms of their emotional state. And so there's a lot of fear with their own employment. So even people that are still gainfully employed are just very skittish and worried about what is next week going to look like, what's next month going to look like. And I think that kind of throws people off into potentially a wild tailspin with their financial situation, even though people are required by law in most places now to not go out and do too much traveling, do too much social type things. There's still a lot of ways people can harm themselves financially, and it could be panicking, making mistakes with their investments. It could be just being on Amazon nonstop ordering things, and that type of stuff is going on. So I think that's the biggest thing is people are scared, and so it's causing them to act very irrationally and sometimes on opposite ends of the spectrum just within days and weeks of themselves, just because of how emotional this whole situation is.
Yeah, and there's a lot of confusion on what can be helpful, because usually in a recession, they're like, stop going out to restaurants so much. And we've all eliminated that from our budget, essentially. So beyond the usual things that we should be always doing in a recession, what are some of the standard advice that you would give your clients just to handle this kind of economy in general when it's a recession? We'll delve into what specific assistance people are being given right now, but what's some good general advice for people navigating recession?
Yeah, so it's April 18th right now. As of today, we're not currently classified as a recession, but it's very probable by the time this episode is released, we'll be in the middle of a recession. And whether you're preparing for a recession, let's say if somehow we manage to hold this off and recession's still not hitting us just yet, whether you're preparing for a recession or trying to look through a recession, emergency savings and just having cash on hand is super valuable. People underestimate that a lot of times. I think when they are fearful, they think that they should be paying off auto loans, that they should be paying off student loans and things like that. That's not the best thing to do. And I know it doesn't sound like it makes sense because you're like, oh, it's gonna reduce how much we owe. That's not the issue during a recession. The issue during a recession is if you lose your job, cash flow is going to dry up, and that's going to set you in a far worse position, because if your cash flow runs dry, you deplete your resources that you have as far as emergency savings. You can't get the value that you paid off on your student loan back. You can't get the value that you paid off faster on your auto loan back because you don't have a job, for one, but then also those are not the types of credit lines that you can actually reuse. So what people turn to then is credit cards, and those are 22% interest rate, way worse than even student loans and definitely way worse than auto loans. So I think that's a big mistake. People think they think there's safety in trying to pay off debts faster, but really what you're doing is hurting yourself. It's better to stockpile cash, still make your payments. You don't want to miss payments if you don't have to, but you should not be thinking to excessively pay down those debts during this time period. And I bet we'll get to it in a second, but there's some provisions within the CARES Act, which is a part of the stimulus, to help ride out this recession as best as possible. But there's some unique student loan kind of stuff going on right now, which is very valuable.
Okay, yeah, so and I'm glad that you pointed out the thing about the debts, because I know that for our generation, we got a whole motley crew, a rogues gallery of different debt kind of things a lot of us are dealing with. Okay, so we need to make sure that we have some cash on hand. What are some other things that we should at least be mindful of before a recession or what have you?
Yeah, so the best thing, and obviously a lot has gone on in the stock market and investments just in general, even if you have real estate, has been being hammered, especially if it's more commercial real estate, because shops can't be open. Businesses that are normally tenants of those spaces can't afford to pay rent. So there's a lot of issues even with real estate and rental properties and things like that right now. But typically, the best thing you could ever do is get your investment stuff in order before something like this happens. So put it in a place that you can understand and know the worst case scenario. Should a recession occur, should the market just fall out on some of these things and the values temporarily impacted, because that's where a lot of people make their mistakes on the investment side. On the 401k side, they think that they can handle a lot more of a aggressive portfolio, and that's what has happened over these years. The stock market has been doing really well for 11 years basically, and so that gives people a lot of false confidence. Oh, I can definitely handle volatility, I can handle risk, I'm just going to go all in full tilt. But all it takes is a small little change, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, the stock market doesn't just go up every day, it doesn't go up every month and every year. There's some randomness to it, there's some volatility to it, and then people quickly change their tune after they've already lost value. So making a plan up front to understand what's the worst case scenario, and do you have the stomach to ride through that? If not, dial it down a notch before those types of events occur. Luckily, at least right now, things have rallied back on the typical investment side. So people can, if they didn't make the mistake already of selling low and buying high, then they got a new chance to reallocate things now that things are not so bad. But again, things are going to be jumping around, I imagine, for the near term and probably even for the next year or two. So you want to make sure that you have the stomach to ride out that volatility, because doing the wrong thing at the wrong time, that's where people shoot themselves in the feet and underperform because of the emotions and thinking that thinking that you can basically time stuff, when even people paid millions of dollars have a hard time deciding where the market's going to go in a month.
Yeah, and I think that even for folks who don't have stocks or a portfolio, this sort of idea of being cautious, being sort of risk savvy and risk adverse, and also trying to, it sounds, don't make too many rash decisions in this moment? You were saying before about your clients who are like trying to buy up stuff and then they're like, oh, we got to unload it, or even just like the folks who are like stocking up on like eggs or toilet paper. It sounds like you're saying be a little cautious with what you're doing. Did I interpret this right, or am I off base?
No, you're 100% accurate. And I think that's what I do is financial planning. So I think that's the benefit of financial planning is when you wild hairs or kind of emotional behaviors where you feel like you want to control a situation and act, that basically the best thing you can do is ground it in reality and look at the whole picture, not just react irrationally, and see what it's actually going to mean long term if you make these decisions. And obviously that helps my clients navigate this stuff and not do both of those things that they were thinking in that situation. But it just helps you take a second, breathe, and don't try to act rash, like you said. Another thing that people are trying to think about and maybe force themselves to do is, should we be buying homes right now and things of that nature? And not much has changed. You're not going to get that much of a benefit or value as far as homes values decreasing. They haven't really decreased as of yet, but people again start to think that they have to do something, and then they put some additional pressure on themselves to act outside of what their initial goals and plans were in the first place.
Okay, yeah, and I think another good thing to think about is that when you are trying to have a long term or trying to be a little bit conservative with this, it's also wise to do that because there's a lot of new events that keep developing. The CARES Act, which we have mentioned, that has gone through. There's probably other things that are going to come into the works, but let's talk about the CARES Act, since that is the big thing for us as of recording, which is April 18th of 2020. So tell us a little bit about what should we know about the CARES Act? What does this mean for people and their finances?
Yeah, it's super important. It was definitely needed. There'll probably be some additional iterations or hopefully some new stimulus coming down the lines. I don't know if you've seen the news, but the things that were supposed to be there for business owners, especially small business owners, dried up basically within 24 hours. And it's because a lot of the larger corporations that needed a lot more money soaked it up. And yeah, there's a lot more work that needs to get done. But as far as the things that came out of that right now, again, it was important. I recorded a quick little video series and I described it as when Spider-Man has to do two things at once. So I use Green Goblin as an example of, he set a train to go off some bridge. And so Spider-Man needs to try to save that from falling in, but he also needs to fight the Green Goblin, which is the coronavirus right now. And so basically he's shooting a web onto the train to catch it before it falls, and it's hanging there suspended. That's what the CARES Act is basically. And we still have to fight the coronavirus, so we don't know when the end is going to be in sight for that. But that's kind of what the CARES Act serves. It's the biggest thing by far was the unemployment aspect. And so the unemployment is $600 a week on top of what your state limit would have allowed you to receive. Normally, there's also a week where you have to wait before you can start receiving unemployment benefits. But the federal government and the CARES Act stepped in and said, nope, we're going to cover you from the get-go. And they also extended it by an additional 13 weeks. So they call it unemployment on steroids, and that's exactly what it is. So that's going to be super helpful. Some people, oddly enough, may be making more on unemployment than they were beforehand because of that just flat $600 a week more. It wasn't based on income. It's not based off of anything like that. It's just, nope, this is going to be on top of your normal unemployment benefit. For high earners, it's not going to cover everything. So that's one of the things I'm talking with my clients with is, yep, if this happens, what is going to be your income gap basically? So unemployment was the biggest piece. The other thing that has made a huge impact too is student loans. So any federal student loans that kind of fall under the federal student loans, you are not accruing any interest. And as of right now, you should have seen that all student loan payments have been stopped. And so that's huge. You can continue to pay your student loans if you want to, but it doesn't make sense at this point, especially if you don't have an emergency savings, because no interest is accruing. What you could do instead is put that money you would normally put to the student loan payment into a separate savings account, let it build up. And basically, as of right now, this is through September 30th. 2020, where you don't have to make payments and no interest is accruing. And worst case scenario or best case scenario in this situation is you can build that up in a savings account in case of emergency. And then by September 30th, where things are scheduled to be turned back on, you turn back on your student loan payments. And if you wanted to, all that money you saved up, you could apply it towards that student loan. And it would have been the same as if you would have been paid all throughout, but it gave you that flexibility and bought you some time to decide that, yep, that's going to be the best decision for you.
Okay, that's fantastic. And there's also some other programs that not necessarily with the government, but also some banks, credit card companies. There's a lot of different ways that some companies are trying to help out their customers to waive payments or defer fees. I know that we can't go into the nitty-gritty of all of them, but have you been talking with your clients about some of these? Do you have any opinions? Should consumers take companies up on the offer? Is there something maybe consumers should look into before they say yes to some of these deals? Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on those sort of programs with these private creditors and banks and stuff.
Sure. Yeah. So I think the key word you mentioned is private creditors. So it's not federal systems and organizations that we're talking about at this kind of part of the process. And yeah, there are companies that are realizing people are probably not going to be able to pay us anyways. So what can we do to give them flexibility? The biggest downside that I've seen, and I haven't had to do too much looking into this, luckily for any of my clients at this point. So my info on this hasn't applied to my clients, but what I've seen a lot of people put in warning signs around is like the mortgage aspects. And I imagine this is going to be similar for all of those private companies. They still want to get paid. They're not going to give you a free ride like the government's allowing you to do with student loans, where it's no interest. There's not going to be any crazy downside effect of the student loan side, but that's a federal situation. They're able to increase taxes down the line and kind of kick the can down the road. Corporations and private companies are not likely to do those types of things. The most you'll see is probably some random things where you can get like an extended free trial to try something out. So I've seen a lot of that on like educational systems and whatnot. But when it comes to like paying your mortgage, paying your credit cards, what's happening is they're going to let you hit the pause button, but it's very likely that the interest is still going to accrue. And so there's going to be a big balloon payment or just larger payments you'll have to pay down the line. And so that's important to be aware of, especially in a mortgage situation. You're not only paying your loan and the interest, you a lot of times have your property taxes tied to your mortgage payment as well as your home insurance. Those things, the mortgage company doesn't have control over letting you skip out on those payments. So those will also be ballooned too. So there's just a lot of things that, yeah, you might be able to defer, but there's going to be interest accruing that's going to cost more money down the line. And there might be a big balloon payment that you have to be ready for. So if you are going to take them up on it, I'd say it's a break in case of emergency type situation. And yeah, definitely it gives you flexibility if you need it. I wouldn't take those things up because it's just going to be a lot of additional costs. You're going to have to plan for that balloon payment. Otherwise, you're going to risk possibly losing your home, possibly having your credit dinged. I know we talked a little bit before this, and you mentioned that you think that there's probably some provisions for more flexibility on the credit reporting side. I'm not too familiar with that, but I imagine there probably will have to be some type of solution. But at the end of the day, if the government isn't going to be able to stop a lot of organizations and mortgage companies and things like that from reporting over the long term. So if you get too far behind, I'm sure there's only going to be a window of time that you qualify for that protection. And then after a few months or a few years, if you're not on your feet, those things will probably start counting against you, I would imagine.
Okay, so it's not like we're having a recess on our responsibilities, unfortunately.
Student loans. That's the beautiful thing about the student loans. I was super surprised. I think they figure that's better than giving everyone just eliminating the student loan debt, because that would have been a lot more costly for the government. But I was very surprised and pleased with that ability, and it allows people to start building up their emergency savings in the meantime.
Yeah, for sure. Because they say like for a lot of Americans, I have the stat right here where it says something like 60% of the people in the US on average have no more than maybe 400 to 500 dollars in some sort of savings. So it's definitely something where I think people are trying to do something to help folks. And we've talked about a lot of ways for the people listening that they can do to triage the situation for themselves. And we're getting closer to the end of the episode, but is there anything that we haven't talked about that you can recommend people just think about, or people do, some sort of final bit of advice for folks who are listening, looking at their wallet or their Intuit, their TurboTax, whatever they're working with, and feeling, ooh, yikes, eesh. I know every time I open up, because I subscribe to the Morning Brew, and I open that up in the morning, there's always a part of me that clicks on it. It's just, okay, brace yourself. And then I look at all the business reports. But what's some final bit of advice for everybody else who's thinking, yikes?
Yeah, so the good thing to be aware of is most people in America, unless you're just kind of poverty level or just very low income, most people do have some discretionary expenses. They might not feel like it because they become a part of your normal life, but you can control at least a portion of your expenses. And so I think that's important to look at when I'm reviewing that type of clients. I call it the burn rate, because if something does hit the fan, if you lose employment or there's some additional costs, we're going to have to look at how quickly you're burning through your resources. That's your emergency savings, that's any 401ks, retirement accounts you may have. If you have a home equity line of credit, that's what we're looking at. How quickly you burn through resources you have before things really get sketchy. And it's a good argument before a recession or in a recession to just look at where your money is going. And right now, just assess the situation. If you think it's a possibility you may be losing your job, I would start tightening the belt a little bit now. And definitely if you've lost your job and you're fearful, I know it's hard to do, because when people are stressed out, what they want to do is try to feel like they're in control. So they spend a weird cyclical effect where you create more stress for yourself because you make horrible financial decisions when your financial situation is stressed out. But look at your budget and find out how quickly you're going to be running through things. Find out which things you can pause button on. Find out you can hit the delete button on. And it's like that Tetris type scenario where you want to try to start removing some bars, so you're not getting too close to game over at the top of that.
Yeah, and I would like to add a little bit to that, because that is very smart for job seekers. And I think also that folks who have a small business like myself or you, we can also listen to that. I was looking through, okay, tech subscriptions. If any of you guys have a small business, that it's really easy to build up little subscriptions to things like, oh, this will post to my Instagram, or this is a tool that helps make videos better. Go through those tools and see exactly which ones are bringing you any sort of ROI. Like my little Instagram thing, yes, it's $9 a month, but I'm not getting anything from there. So that was an easy thing to delete, that kind of thing. Look over what you have, think about your systems, especially systems that you maybe are having a virtual assistant or somebody else, a service provider, do. Make sure it's something where if worse comes to worse, you can take that over from that person if you're not able to afford the sporadic help. So I think that's just a good thing for people to do, because that is also something that can make people feel like they are in control. So that need that you were talking about to have control during these times, they can apply it to just taking an inventory of their expenses, incomes, and things like that. So Lucas, this has been some great advice, and I know that this situation's ever changing. So depending on how the wind blows, Lucas, I might bring you back on the show so you can explain all this stuff to all of us over again. But thank you for being on the show, and I know that there are folks who are listening and they want to know more about you and what a fiduciary is, and you also have a podcast, so you have plenty of ways for people to learn from you and to reach out to you. So give us some deets on how we can find you on the web.
Sure. Yeah. The best place to find me would be levelupfinancialplanning.com. And you'll be able to find my podcast there. I also create strategy guides, which is my version of blog posts. I create video bites, I create cheat sheets and things like that. So trying to make your financial planning as fun as possible. And the nice thing about those resources is those are all free. Similar to yourself, Sami, we're single individual people. We can only help so many people one-on-one. And so when I create those resources, it's to provide free value to anyone that needs it. And even if they can't afford my services, but if you're really interested in thinking that a financial plan is going to add a lot of benefit, then definitely reach out. I have a complimentary call just to confirm your thoughts that I would be able to add a ton of value. And then we can get off and get started there as far as building a plan and building any action plans that you need to actually take to move yourself in the right direction. Because I think a lot of people realize that, oh, this is a wake-up call. I've been really busy recently with a lot of people saying, yep, this changes things. I can't be as aggressive as I thought with investments because I can't handle it. And they're worried about reaching their goals. So that's where I'm going to be able to add the most value, but there's a lot of free resources as well.
Awesome. And just for everybody listening, Lucas has a lot of good information that's great for tech professionals. I know that UX designers and web developers and project managers are a big part of my audience. And Lucas does have a lot of resources that are very applicable to that demographic. So if that's something that you guys have been thinking about, looking at all the layoffs with Bird and some of those other unicorn companies, TripAdvisor and stuff like that, Lucas is definitely a good person for folks in Silicon Valley and in tech in general to kind of be like, hey, good buddy Lucas, I need a fiduciary. He's going to be a good fiduciary for techies. Yeah, Lucas, I think we got all the deets. Check out Level Up Financial Planning. And thank you again, Lucas, for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me on a second time. And yeah, anytime you need it, I'm always ready to talk about financial stuff. So whenever you find an opportunity for me, thanks for having me back on.
Thank you. And guys, thank you so much for listening. As always, I'm Sami Gardner, and this is the Career Kickstart Show. Bye. Change your career, change your life at CareerKickstartAcademy.com.